Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first virtual conference of the Virginia Water Monitoring Council. My name is James Beckley, and I am pleased to be chair of the Virginia Water Monitoring Council Steering Committee. Many of you may know me from my days working with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. I now work for Chesterfield County as the laboratory supervisor for their drinking water facility. I'm here today as a chair of the Virginia Water Monitoring Council Steering Committee, to serve as the moderator for today's session. To begin the day, I would like to thank everyone for attending for the conference this morning. Your participation in this year's annual conference helps to make it a success. We have more than 100 people in attendance or have registered for the conference. I also want to thank our partners who are making this event possible. The Alliance Chesapeake Bay provided funding for the event and handled the conference registration. A special thank you to the Alliance's Sophie Stearns and Liz Chudoba. Liz is also the Steering Council Committee's co-chair. The Virginia Save Our Streams, or the Save Our Streams program with the Isaac Walton League of America, is hosting the GoToWebinar sessions and is providing audio and visual support. A very special thank you goes out to Rebecca Shore, who is a member of the Council Steering Committee and is handling all the audio-visual technical support. The Virginia Department of Environmental Quality has promoted the conference and has also provided financial support for this event with funding from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. The Virginia Lakes and Watersheds Association is supporting the event financially and helped to promote the conference. The Virginia Water Resources Research Center at Virginia Tech promoted the conference and provides administrative assistance to the VWMC. And last but not least, all the members of the Council Steering Committee who assisted with planning and implementing this event. We really do appreciate all the help and support that we've received. Before we get started with the conference, I would like to provide a brief background about the Virginia Water Monitoring Council so that you have a better idea of who we are. The Virginia Council is celebrating its 21st year. We promote information sharing among our membership and encourage collaborations among water monitoring programs in Virginia. The VWMC serves as a forum for communication through our weekly email digest of what is going on in the world of water here in our state. We also provide educational events such as today's conference. Many people in Virginia collect and analyze water monitoring data. Therefore, our membership represents a wide range of diverse interests from local governments, state and federal environmental agencies, nonprofit organizations, academia, citizen science, and corporate entities. We currently have more than 700 members who represent more than 275 different organizations. Anyone with an interest in water monitoring is invited to join, and membership is free. If you are not a member and you are welcome to join at any time, simply ask to join when you complete your post-conference evaluation. We just request your contact information and your affiliation with a water monitoring organization if applicable. Just since we're kind of all talking virtually today, we still do have some housekeeping announcements. If you are experiencing any technical issues, simply type in a brief description of your issue and submit it as a comment or question via the chat pane or email sos@iwla.org. We will do our best to help you fix the issue. Today's conference will consist of presentations followed by an opportunity for questions as time allows. The Q&A will follow each presentation. There will not be a large Q&A at the end of the conference. Use the questions chat pane to submit your questions or comments. Liz Chudoba will read as many submissions as possible during the Q&A period and give the speakers time to respond. We designated this conference partly based on the feedback we received from our 2019 conference. After this conference, you will receive a link to an online evaluation survey. We ask you to complete it, and when you do, know that your responses will help us plan the 2021 conference. The conference presentations are being recorded and will be available after the conference. A link to the recordings will be sent to all participants. If you requested a certificate of attendance, we will send it to you by email following the conference. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize our 2020 Scholarship Award winner. We recently began a tradition in honor of memory of longtime VWMC Steering Committee member Ken Brooks by providing a conference scholarship in his name. Ken was a volunteer water monitor and a strong proponent of getting young people involved in water monitoring. This year, we awarded the Ken Brooks Scholarship to Deshelle Demps, who is a biology major at Norfolk State University. Congratulations, Deshelle. We are glad to have you with us today. Before we get started with our conference, our keynote speaker at 9:40, I do have a quick poll question I'd like to give everyone a chance to respond to. We're curious to know more about our audience. And so we have a question of what type of organization do you want work for or represent? To answer, simply use your cursor to click on the responses that best describe your association. If you're unable to complete the poll, just submit your answers in the chat box.
We've got some answers rolling in here, and we'll close the poll in a few moments. It looks like right now we have 14% of folks coming in from local government, 8% citizen scientists, volunteer monitors, 22% academia, 9% NGO nonprofits, and 48% other. So if you answered other, feel free to send what sort of group you work for in the chat. That'll give us a great idea of who's out there. And I'm going to close the poll in a few moments.
Thank you for the responses. This is very interesting to see the breakdown, good representation from local governments and citizen science, strong representation, 22% from academia, and 9% from NGOs or nonprofit organizations. It would be very interesting to see what organizations are represented by other.
Yeah, we had some answers coming in: state government, EPA, master naturalists, VDOT. Yeah, a great spread of folks.
That's fantastic. Okay, well, I think it's time for us to go start with our presentations today. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ann Phillips. Rear Admiral Phillips serves as the Special Assistant to the Governor for Coastal Adaptation and Protection for the state of Virginia. Prior to joining the administration, she worked to address sea level rise and climate impact on national security at the regional, national, and international level. She helped chair the Infrastructure Working Group for the Hampton Roads Sea Level Rise Preparedness and Resilience Intergovernmental Pilot Planning Project. That's a mouthful. Convened by the Old Dominion University. Preceding her work in climate impact and sea level rise, Ann served nearly 31 years on active duty for the U.S. Navy as a surface warfare officer. She is also a Level 2 certified Chesapeake Bay landscape professional. We are pleased to have Ann with us today to talk about coastal resilience in Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you, James, for that very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here with you all today at the 2020 annual conference. A special thank you also to Weedon Clo, who invited me to participate and speak at this event when it was going to be held this spring, and very diligently stayed with me as the schedule changed, and I'm happy to be able to be here with you all today. Thank you also to Rebecca Shore and Liz Jambuda, who have helped coordinate and collaborate to make sure all of us who are speaking with you this morning can at least marginally operate our computers in a way that is of some value. So For many of you, I'm sure I've spoken at lakes and watersheds, and some of you who are involved in coastal adaptation and protection and certainly water quality know me and know what I'm here at the state to do. Some of you may not, and for those, I am the Special Assistant to the Governor for Coastal Adaptation and Protection, and as such, I am the primary point of contact for resources to address coastal adaptation and flooding mitigation across the Commonwealth. That includes an awful lot of work in the context of outreach, stakeholder engagement, liaison across and between agencies, planning districts, stakeholders, localities, nonprofits, trying to break down stovepipes and align efforts across the state and share information across and between a number of stakeholders. What I want to leave you with today is what's most important, I think, out of my presentation that I hope you'll keep with you. The first is to deal with water management and coastal resilience in Virginia. It's going to be all hands on deck, and it's going to require coordination, communication, and collaboration at a level where we in the Commonwealth are not quite used to operating. This is a Dillon Rule state, localities and our independent entities, political subdivisions of the Commonwealth. And so the idea of collaborating in a strong, positive, and continued way exists in some areas and is more of a challenge in others. The second thing I'd like to leave you with is that water management and water quality are two things that now must go together. They're inextricably linked. You can't do one without the other anymore. In coastal Virginia, we're dealing with rising tides. If you're in this area and have been over the weekend, you know that we've had scenes like the one you see on this slide, the bench there, over the weekend, and our highest tide of this series of high tides caused by wind predominantly is going to be this afternoon at 1 p.m. So we're dealing with this with increasing frequency in this area. But the water quality world very much focused on runoff, erosion control, maintaining clean and safe waterways. Well, these two things now go together because as more and more water is around, more and more water has to be dealt with. So these two things go together. Please think of them together. And then lastly, climate resilience is a forward-looking game. We need historical data to be up to date so that we can look at projections and see where we are relative to them. But this requires planning for the future that is different from the past. We can no longer rely on things being the way they have been. We have to consider new perspectives, and I'll talk about some of that today as we move forward. So first of all,
if you'd like to turn your webcam back on as well, just want to remind you about that.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Let's see if I can get to my next slide here. Why won't this advance? Here we go. Okay, hopefully I haven't overclicked there. So to my earlier comments, and I think you can see my camera now, I turned it on. We have unprecedented
risk. We can see it.
Okay, great. We have unprecedented risk here in coastal Virginia, but we also have unprecedented foresight. And we do have a responsibility, as the governor has stated in Executive Order 24, to prepare coastal Virginia to adapt and protect our coastline because so much of our economy depends on this. So I'm often asked, is it really that bad? Is it really that bad in coastal Virginia? Is there really that much flooding? Is it really that much of a challenge? Is it anything more than something that happens very, very rarely? And the answer is yes, it is really that bad, and it's getting worse. And if you live here, you know that, and you don't have to be here too long before you figure it out. And I think from my perspective, if people are trying to get to work, get to school, get to the doctor, get to the store, and they have to change the way they go about their normal pattern of life because water is where water isn't supposed to be, then we have a problem. And we're there at Hampton Roads in many, many places. So that what you're looking at now and the little website that's shown up there is a good thing to perhaps copy and post in the chat for people to look at. This is work that has been done recently by the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resilience at Old Dominion University. It looks at taking NOAA's intermediate high projections from their 2017 curves and adds NOAA's latest detailed nuisance flooding data. So this is something that we haven't had in an overlay before. It also shows areas that are impacted will be impacted by nuisance flooding, and areas that will be impacted by, say, a Cat 1 storm or a good strong nor'easter. So if you get to this website and you want to look around through it, you're looking at ODU if you're not familiar with that part of Hampton Roads. And you're looking at Old Dominion University in the year 2060, again, based on NOAA's 2017 intermediate high projections. And I have everything turned on in this, and this isn't a live slide, so you're going to have to go to the website yourself, but let's look at it. But so red is areas that are impacted by sea level rise structures. Orange, things that would be influenced in 2060 by tidal nuisance flood events like we're having now. And yellow, or things that will be influenced by a moderate flood, so maybe a Cat 1 storm. The areas flooded, if it's permanently flooded by 2060, it's in dark blue. If it's a moderate flood event, you'll see green. So the green's a little farther inland because that would be a Cat 1 storm. And then the lighter blue is nuisance flooding. But when you start to look at this, the road that runs through the middle, kind of past the football stadium there, that's Hampton Boulevard. So that's a major thoroughfare in and out of not only Old Dominion University, down into downtown Norfolk, but up to Naval Station Norfolk. And all of these houses that you see here, to the right is Colonial Place, to the left is Larchmont, and in between are a number of neighborhoods in and around Old Dominion University, all income levels, a major university, the coal port you can see down, the railroad tracks down to the south there, a large HRSD facility is just north of that. So this is the story in Norfolk, Virginia, one portion of Norfolk, Virginia, in 2060 if we don't do anything. So if today's nuisance flooding that we're dealing with, well, tomorrow we'll see that at every high tide. By 2060, we'll start to see the nuisance flooding we will have this afternoon at nearly every high tide. And NOAA updates that every year. Dr. Billy Sweet does this work. So you can look at that too if you're not familiar with it already. All right, moving to the next slide. Aha, got that down to a science. So as I've been with the Commonwealth over the last 2 years, we've established a series of priorities as we're moving forward. And this particular slide was taken a year ago on Llewellyn Avenue, which is pretty close to where I live in Norfolk. Yesterday, it looked just like that at high tide, and it'll look like that again this afternoon. Like I said, at 1 p.m., except there'll be different cars stuck in it. But it's a recurring theme in this part of the city. People are used to it, but they still feel the need to give it a shot, as that car did last year. And that's salt water, so things aren't looking so good for that car. Of our priorities, acknowledge climate change is real and make decisions based on the best available science. In that context, focusing on natural and nature-based features as a first line of defense. Natural and nature-based features and the ability to preserve our wetlands is absolutely critical to how we will address and adapt to sea level rise and recurrent flooding over time. They won't stop it, but they will give more space for the water to go. We're also looking at aligning and working to align state agency programs to consider resilience. And as I said, climate as a future game, a projected future prediction game for the long haul over time. And so that's a change because most regulatory processes are stationary. They're based on current conditions. We'll talk about that in a few minutes when I look at legislation. I've already mentioned the need for collaborative programs and also the need for environmental justice and equity to build capacity for those communities who have no capacity to plan or to determine the kinds of things they must do to prepare and to improve their circumstance within their neighborhoods. So as we move forward, particularly as we work to look at the community flood development fund, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides, those will be opportunities for us to get capacity to those communities who are impacted by this, in some cases have the most extreme impact in their future, and yet have the least ability to even plan to begin to prepare for what outcomes can work for them, and to ensure equitable access to funding for them as they think about their future. And lastly, to integrate resilience throughout and across state agencies and processes. That's there has been some legislation to that effect proposed. It was deferred to the next General Assembly session this year. It was a bill proposed by Delegate Willett. There is a need to do this. Other states have done it. How can we do it here in Virginia in a way that's most effective for us? So I've mentioned legislation several times. The first thing I'd like to talk about is all of this is from the 2020 General Assembly. House Bill 1313 was Delegate Hodges' legislation, and actually does a couple of things. First of all, it puts a Chief Resilience Officer position in code. Up until now, the Chief Resilience Officer, who is currently Secretary Matt Strickler, Secretary of Natural Resources, that position only existed in executive order, and it's moved around from administration to administration. Under Governor McAuliffe, it was in Public Safety and Homeland Security. So now it exists in code for the first time, and there are, you know, specific that the governor shall appoint a Chief Resilience Officer is in code, and then specific duties that officer, that position must execute. It also added additional authorities to my position, which was already in code. If it would add a staff and a budget, that would be wonderful. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes too. But fortunately, armed with help from the Center for Climate and Security, the Virginia Coastal Policy Center, the Virginia Sea Grant, Coastal at Virginia Tech, Virginia Institute of Marine Science, and a host of other stakeholders, nonprofits, Wetlands Watch, and others. There's a small but growing group of people who are working all towards a common purpose. But it is challenging not having a staff full-time or any kind of a budget to work with. So, but we're making progress there. We're making progress there. It also expanded 1313 DCR's flood protection program coordination, stakeholder and capacity, and outline additional authorities in that context. So it gives DCR a little more flexibility in how they run that program and who should be involved in that process. House Bill 981, you might know as the Reggie bill, actually took an existing shoreline resilience fund structure that had never been capitalized and recast it as the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, with funding support to be provided through Virginia joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So to step back and talk about Reggie, Virginia will join Reggie officially January 1st. It never fails. Of this year, so of 2021. So on January 1st of 2021, we will officially be a part of that program. We will be the 11th state to join. The first auction that Virginia will participate in, so the first shale carbon credits that Virginia will participate in, will be in the early spring, March, April timeframe. And as soon as that auction is completed, money will be deposited into two funds. One, 50% of the money will go into a fund authorized and overseen by Department of Housing and Community Development, looking at energy efficiency opportunities across Virginia. And the 45% of the money will go into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. Again, that is statewide flood preparedness across Virginia. The remaining 5% is split 2% for DHCD, 3% for Department of Environmental Quality, to provide for administrative oversight for Reggie and other responsibilities related to managing this fund money. So this is coming. The Department of Conservation and Recreation is responsible for managing this fund. They are going through the process now of determining how they will set up stakeholder engagement and outreach and activities, and also setting up initial guidelines for how they think this fund should be managed. And so with guidelines and stakeholder input, we will be ready in the early spring to see what we have for money and then make some determinations about how this request for funding proposals will be executed upon or acted upon. The next bill, 1164, was really an environmental justice bill related to the Department of Environmental Quality's mission, but it also directs DEQ to address climate change across all programs and processes, and so regulatory process. And so this is something that, yes, this applies to DEQ, but more broadly, how can we create an opportunity for something like this to apply to all agencies? And that's what Delegates Willett's bill was going to do. And we'll see if there's something along those lines that can be considered in this upcoming General Assembly session. House Bill 504 amends the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act to include coastal resilience and adaptation to sea level rise and climate change as part of the regulatory process for the State Water Control Board. The Department of Environmental Quality is responsible for working on this change, and they are working through their required regulatory processes now to develop how they will initially provide guidance to the Water Control Board, and then over time develop that into a regulatory process. So they are also have done some stakeholder outreach and engagement, and are preparing a more broad process there as well. And then lastly, Senate Bill 776 strengthen the living shorelines. This is already a bill about living shorelines and wetlands protection, but strengthen that bill such that living shorelines are the approved shoreline management approach, unless science shows that using a living shoreline in a specific circumstance, and this is coastal, is not suitable. So all of this legislation took place in the 2020 General Assembly, and so a number of agencies, as you can see, DEQ, DCR, VMRC, are all involved in responding to this, soliciting public comment, holding public input sessions, and then moving forward with this expanded legislation. So all good news for coastal adaptation and protection. And again, throughout this, water quality and water management are being considered together, which is critically important for Virginia's future. Let's see if I get the next slide to come up here. Hello. There we go. Okay, but what's coastal turns out to be statewide. And even though my job is focused on the 8 coastal planning districts, an awful lot of things that are needs there are needs for the entire state. The first is updating Atlas 14 Volume 2, which is the federally mandated standard for rainfall data. It is historic. It is not even updating it. It won't project future with climate impact considered, but updating our historic data, which we know to be incorrect at this point in time based on work that has been done by the City of Virginia Beach, studies and research, and also by the Virginia Transportation Research Commission, VTRC, with the University of Virginia. We know that this data is not correct. It was last updated, Volume 2 was done in 2004 and then updated in 2006. So it's 14 to 16 years old. Should probably at a minimum be updated at least every 10 years. And since we know it's off, updating this is of critical importance. We're working on that. It's a federal FHWA DOT pooled funding submission process. So there is a funding request shared across 4 states, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina. And part of my task this fall is to figure out how we fund our portion of that. So you may know about this already. If you don't, you could take a look at the Federal Highway Administration's website. In addition, we need predictive rainfall projections. So IDF, intensity, duration, and frequency projections statewide. I know there is an EPA-funded Chesapeake Bay watershed program intent to do this kind of work for the Chesapeake Bay watershed, but that leaves out the bottom third of the state. So we need this for the whole state, because if we're going to, in the future, we may have to update regulations based on this data. And how do you regulate when you got 2/3 here and 1/3 that you don't have any data for? So that's a need. Predictive floodplain mapping is also a need statewide. A full riverine and coastal gauge system statewide. We have a gauge system in the valley and the Shenandoah eye flows. It needs work. The money to make corrections to it was in the budget. It was in an unallotted status last time I was able to check, and so I don't know where that is, but there's need remains, and we need a full coastal gauge system as well, which we don't really have. So that will help us monitor, but it'll also help us warn. More important. Statewide resilience, still a need here. Climate resilience plan statewide. It was done during the Governor Kane administration. Small update, significant update under Governor McAuliffe, but largely energy focused. But there is a need to update and strategize and plan for resilience statewide across all aspects of resilience, not just coastal, not just flooding. And then, of course, a consistent and dedicated funding source, which House Bill 911 and RGGI will begin to provide, but it will in no way meet the need over time. However, since we have no funding source right now, it is eminently better than that. And finally, as we look at next steps here, when Governor Northam addressed this current special session of the General Assembly, among other comments he made in his opening remarks, one was that water management needs cannot wait. And if I leave you with anything today, it will be that. We are working towards developing a coastal master plan framework for how we will move forward in the context of developing a full coastal master plan for the Commonwealth, which is one of our tasks at Executive Order 24. That's coming later this fall, and there'll be, with that will be recommendations for other things that we think will help coordinate, collaborate, and communicate better across not only agencies, but other stakeholders, academia, localities, planning districts for coastal Virginia. I think my last slide kind of goes back to the beginning. This is an urgent matter. This is actually a 2-year-old picture. It was taken in Pungo 2 years ago. Yes, that is a pig. But we don't, every delay, every time we step back and wait, we miss an opportunity to make a difference. And so with this legislation that I spoke of, with the interest of the Commonwealth, not only at the agency level, but at the Office of the Governor level, and with some of the changes that took place in the 2020 General Assembly, we are beginning to move forward in a way that can make a real difference for the Commonwealth. And so I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Anne. That was great. We have plenty of time for more discussion. If you have something that you would like to share about from what you just heard, use the questions chat pane to submit your question or comment.
Great, and we have a few questions that have come in already. So the first one is, are the maps from ODU based on the dynamic coastal modeling of the sea, taking into account coastal drivers such as tidal variability, storm surge, waves, storms, wind, etc., or just long-term SLR with static tide level?
So this is a GIS overlay, which is looking at projected sea level rise overlays, that work that NOAA has already done, and then adding over top of that nuisance flooding projections that NOAA has done that vary by locality. So it is not one number or one amount for one area. In that case, it is somewhat dynamic. And a good question on the wind, and I don't have the answer. I will ask George McLeod. George McLeod did this work at ODU. So those of you who know him, he can give you the fine details. And additional information is available on their website. And there is a report done by the Center for Commonwealth Center for Current Flooding Resilience, which is posted now, and you can read more details about George's work in that report, which might answer your question. I should know the answer, but I don't off the top of my head.
Great, thank you. Another question, will there be an opportunity for the public to comment on the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan before it's considered final?
Yes, because what we are working on now is a framework for how we will develop this master plan. So there will be an opportunity to comment on the framework, as in, this is a good idea, but maybe you need to do something else here. And as we then work towards building a master plan, there will be opportunities for the public to comment on that as well.
Great. Let's see. If an organization wants to be part of the Coastal Master Plan process, how would they go about getting involved?
Well, I think they could contact me, which would be great, because a lot of organizations already are a part of this in some regard. But if you think you should be and you aren't, please contact me. My contact information was on the first slide, but it's, my address is ann.phillips@governor.virginia.gov.
Great. What is being auctioned for the RGGI? Also, how does your office work with the VA Coastal Zone Management Program and its partners?
So what's being auctioned for RGGI is carbon credits. And that's a long and complicated process, but essentially Virginia has, and the other RGGI states, set an agreed emission standard, and to emit, you have to pay. And the profits from that, instead of going back to the energy company, and this is only for major energy providers, then instead of the profits going back to the energy company, the profits go to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and to the Energy Efficiency Fund that DHCD will run. And Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. So I work with Coastal Zone Management often and a lot. I'll be talking to their conference this week. I attend all the meetings, and they are really the only entity that exists right now that pulls together collaboratively for a coastal outcome, planning districts, other stakeholders, state agencies, in a room to make decisions about the future of coastal Virginia. The challenge with coastal zone management, and also the challenge with Bay watershed, is the Bay watershed is one area, which doesn't include coast, right? Oceanside. Coastal zone management is Tidewater Virginia, also defined in code. It does include Oceanside, but if you're Crater Planning District, you're not in much of the Bay watershed, and you're not in much of Tidewater, Virginia. You have major flooding problems, and you're a coastal planning district. So my world is all 8 coastal planning districts. So it's beyond the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and it's beyond the coastal zone management program. Because some of the biggest flooding we had maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a pretty major storm come through, kind of went up to the east, to the west of where I am. I'm in Norfolk, Virginia. An awful lot of that flooding took place in the Crater, far western Hampton Roads Planning District and Crater Planning District areas. They have major challenges there. Just they're in the Albemarle Pamlico watershed. It all goes down into North Carolina. So we can't desert them, and my area of responsibility includes them. So we are a little bit expanded beyond the coastal zone management program. But yes, aligned very carefully. And much of the work they are doing to build capacity for planning districts to help plan and prepare for coastal adaptation and protection. There's a grant through their NOAA Section 309 that will start this fall that will help all 8 planning districts build their own capacity, and that's very much aligned with what we're trying to do, not only with the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, but also in creating the master plan.
Great. One other question, is Virginia working with other states or even countries who also have similar issues for these innovative solutions?
Yes, we are. A number of nonprofits this year. So first of all, as we started to look at how we wanted to set up and establish our master plan process, we've looked thoroughly through North Carolina's work, work that's been done in Boston, Texas's plan, Louisiana's plan, South Florida's work at the South Florida Compact, and have taken the bits and pieces of that apply to us and then added our own strategies where we needed to, because Virginia is different. Every state has their own legislative processes and challenges that have to be included and incorporated and considered in developing such a thing. And we're also a part of several groups of resilience officers and coastal adaptation officers that a number of different nonprofits, Environmental Defense Fund, Pew Charitable Trusts are putting together to really facilitate sharing across and between what resilience officers are doing and seeing, and how they're moving forward in their own states and with their own sets of unique challenges. California, I would add, is very much a part of that too. Washington State. So it's a large group, certainly, and growing, as you might imagine. So there's quite a bit of interaction there. Those are quarterly, bi-monthly calls. I'm on all of them. Secretary Strickler has presented at both different organizations. So yes, a lot of work and collaboration across and between within the United States, and also a lot of work primarily with the Dutch. I've worked also on climate as a national security issue before I came to this position, and in that context have attended a planetary security conference in the Netherlands several years in a row, and so have significant interaction in that context with the Netherlands, but also within Virginia. Coastal Virginia, Hampton Roads has hosted a Dutch dialogues and actually had the Netherlands embassy come and work. It was in 2015 with the Hampton Roads region and look at 2 specific areas, within the city of Hampton, Newmarket Creek, and also within the city of Norfolk. And some of that work, in fact, in both cases, large parts of that work have evolved into parts of plans or the plan that both of those localities are using now as they move forward, at least in part. So there's kind of an ongoing connection there. Certainly the city of Hampton is working very closely with a Dutch firm as they do some of their planning. And we still have contacts within the Dutch embassy that we've worked with. So there's quite a bit of activity, I would say, across and between the Dutch dialogues has also been most recently done in Charleston, South Carolina, and a lot of that connection was through connections that people from Charleston made in this region, and of course they've worked in Houston as well and other locations. So it's a circle of people sharing information that continues to grow, I would say. The last thing I would say is there's some nuances that are different with the Dutch. They don't have a subsidence problem, which we have in coastal Virginia. So not only is the water rising, but the land is sinking. They don't get hurricanes, although they do get very large North Atlantic storms. And they have an 800-year head start building up defenses. So, and they are below sea level. So they have to have berms, walls, gates to keep the water out every second of every day. So that's a little bit of a different circumstance that we have in coastal Virginia.
Great, thank you. One last question. Is that a pig on the porch in Pungo?
Yeah. And it's a pet pig because it's on a pillow. You can do a lot of alliterations with a P here. So as many times as I've used that slide, no one's ever said to me that they know where this is. So the house number is not shown, and that's fine. But this is publicly available photograph. But yeah, it's a pig.
All right.
It's quite comfortable. Probably spends a lot of time there.
Well, thank you very much for your talk today, Anne.
Certainly. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, since we have a couple minutes, I do have another poll question I'd like to put up for the audience. I'd like to ask where you're located. On the screen here shortly, if you could pick the answer that best describes where you're located: Northern Virginia, Central Virginia, Southeastern Virginia, Western Virginia, or outside of the state.
We'll leave this poll open for about a minute, so you have some time to fill it in, and then we'll share the results. And if you're calling in from out of state, please do share in the chat box where you're calling from. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here.
Okay, so it looks like most of us are in Central Virginia, 43%, followed by Northern Virginia at 17, Southeastern Virginia by 16, Western Virginia by 13, and 11% out of the state. I'll say for myself, depending throughout my life, I've lived in just about every part of Virginia, from Fairfax County to Martinsville, Virginia, Farmville, Virginia, Sussex County, and now Richmond. So I think I could just put one on each section there for myself. Great.
Wait, folks chatting in that they're coming in from Maryland and Pennsylvania as well.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Well, we're a little bit ahead of time right now. If you want, we can proceed with our next speaker. Our next speaker will be Scott Hardaway, who will be talking about living shorelines and sea level resiliency. So a great follow-on to Anne's presentation. Scott received his BA and MS degrees in geology from East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina in the 1970s, and has been working for the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, VWMC, since 1979. He is currently an associate research scientist at VWMC, where he performs research on a variety of coastal problems, primarily shoreline erosion along the Chesapeake Bay and ocean shorelines of Virginia and Maryland. Welcome, Scott.
Welcome. Can you hear me?
Hear you and see your slides.
Okay. Maybe I'll come over here. Okay. Thanks everybody for being here this morning, and I'd like to thank the committee of the council for inviting me. This morning we're going to talk about some living shoreline sites, typically sill systems, and I got 4 of them to talk about that we've monitored over the years, and we're going to see how they performed over the years. Okay, so these sill systems are rocks, sand, and plants designed for shore protection along the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and they're, I mean, most of the Chesapeake Bay tidal shorelines. We're going to talk about Captain Sinclair, Camp Occohannock on Occohannock Creek, and up in Maryland in St. Mary's City on the St. Mary's River, and on the Patuxent River, Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum. Okay, so we for this this exercise, we looked at 2 scenarios of sea level rise by 2050, the +1 and the plus 2 foot. Trying to get out of the way. The plus 2 foot sea level rise by 2050, which is obviously very significant. So Captain Sinclair is on the Severn River. It belongs to the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission, and we designed a sill system there a few years ago and had it installed. It has a fetch of just a couple miles to the south and southeast, so it's low to medium energy as we discuss it, or as we define it. Here is the project shoreline. It's mostly an eroding marsh shoreline before construction. And here's the project itself. It's composed of 4 sill segments. It runs along about 300 feet of shoreline, and there are 2 gaps, Bay A and Bay C, which are for faunal ingress and egress into the marsh system behind it. Bay B is for the crew team ingress and egress onto the water. These are typical cross sections of the project, showing the rock sill, the sand fill behind it, and the plants that are put in there. The alternate floor typically grows from mid-tide and mean high, and Paytons, the high marsh, grows above that. This is we had a volunteer team come after it was constructed to come in and plant the grasses. You dig a hole, put in some fertilizer, and put in the plant. It's fairly straightforward. We actually had more people than we needed for this. This is the Gloucester High School crew team that were very helpful in getting the project put forward. And as you can see, shortly after, in upper left is what looks like shortly after planting. B is a 1 year after planting, and C is 2 years after planting. And you can see how it evolves over time. The grasses become very robust to get entrenched, and it makes a very nice habitat and a very effective shore protection system. And off to the D, the rock becomes habitat too. A lot of oysters grow on it. It's great habitat for fish to hide. And so all in all, this is the typical living shoreline in Virginia, the sill system. So we actually surveyed it and had part in the design of it, and these are our cross sections. And we looked at it pre, post, and in April 2018, and you can see that we brought in sand, and it has actually migrated up on top of the marsh a little bit. But right now it's very much intact. And this is a drone aerial we took in May. You can see the system. And so when we talk about sea level rise with the 1 foot and the 2 foot, at the 1 foot scenario, what ends up happening, and we've seen this in nature, is that the low marsh, the intertidal marsh, or alternate floor will upgrade if there's a grade to migrate to. The thing about this particular site is that really you kind of run out of places to migrate. You have the marsh behind it. So it'll most likely get flooded by a 2-foot rise in sea level. And what will happen is the rock will become submerged, will become a reef. Where the marsh was will become shallow water. And so your habitats, which you planted and established, they don't go away. They just evolve and change into something different. Okay, Camp Occohannock is on Occohannock Creek, and it is a long fetch out the mouth of Occohannock Creek of about 20 odd miles, but there's very short fetches to the north and to the south there. So the average fetch is probably about a mile. And so we use fetch as a proxy for wave-in or wind wave climate when we're talking about these sites. And this is the project installed. And reach 1, 2, and 3, we didn't put in the cobble sill, but we did put in the sills to the left and sill 1, 2, and 3. Once again, rock, sand, and plant. So we'll look at some typical cross sections. Reach 1, there was a revetment design for that. That's sort of the access road that goes to the other part of the camp. But in order to meet grant requirements, we turned it into a high sill, which is really a better fit. And then as you transition up into the creek, the land goes to a marsh into a low bank. And so the sill sort of followed suit, kind of a little bit lower. And then up in front of the bank, in front of the house there, we had a high bank, 12 odd feet, which we graded. It brought the sand fill up to about a +5, mean low water. We talk verticals in this particular business is in Virginia, everything's relative to mean low water. So here's reach 1. There's a road, the access road. This is pre-construction. And then 5 years after construction, you see the marsh in there. The low marsh is right up against the rock sill, and the high marsh is above it. And then below that, you see pine trees moving in. Well, one of the things about these systems is you kind of need to manage it, because eventually these pine trees will grow and start shading out the marsh. And we want to keep the marsh because it's keeping the turf intact. This is reach 2, just after planting, and you can see the grasses has really came in there very well. And also, like I say, the rocks are habitat. Oysters, fish grow it, occupy it. Oysters grow on it. And just a little shot of a little fish moving around in the rock itself. There's habitat, even with rock. And there's a few snails on the side. This is reach 3 in front of the clubhouse, as it were. And before and right after there was planting in 2013. And then after 5 years, there's been some adjustments to the marsh. We've actually replanted that bare spot, but the fill settled, and so that's really become a non-vegetated wetlands. But the fact is that it's high enough and robust enough for long-term shore protection. And there was a group of folks partnered together to pay for and plan for the planning of this project and monitoring it. This is some action shots, if you will. We got rock and sand came in by truck. Rock was unloaded into piles, and then before you put the rock down, you have to put down filter cloth. The rock goes on top of that, and then the sand comes in behind it. There's the rock being constructing the sill. And you can see, let's see, I missed one. Yep, the sand being pushed in by the little front end loader, rock being built, and then sand. Bank grading required the removal of some trees, but some others were planted to mitigate that in the buffer. So we're drilling a hole, putting in fertilizer, and then putting the plant in. And it's a great community effort, and you can see how happy it makes everybody. And there's the planting gang. So here's our baseline and cross sections that we did when we pre and post construction. And reach 3, you can see the bank that was graded and the fill put in behind it. Reach 2 is in the middle there where the bank is low and there's a marsh, and then Reach 1 is out in front of the road. And here's our scenario, 1 foot and 2 foot. And once again, what you're going to have is you're going to have the migration of the marsh species, the low marsh, into the high marsh, and the high marsh into the upland. Now, a lot of this is dependent on the bank height behind it. With the low bank behind it, you'll see you can have migration of these species, but eventually it'll be flooded. When you have a high bank, all of a sudden the ability of these systems to migrate landward is greatly restricted. You will have vertical accretion, which has been shown to occur in natural marshes around the bay in response to sea level rise. So each site has its own management challenges. Okay, St. Mary's City is on the St. Mary's River and in Maryland. And this is a site that we worked with the folks at DNR in the local county years ago. And so we had actually monitored it back in 2007. And what happened is the sand that was put behind the structures actually adjusted slope. It got a little steeper, but it didn't really impact the vegetation behind it too much. So we look at one end of the project. 2 years after construction, there's the alternate floor. You can see the tall grasses and the small grass behind it. On the right side is the patins. Then in B, after 11 years, this is what the project looked like. And C, 15 years, this is sort of a flooded event. You know, when one is in the area, you try to take pictures of these sites as best you can. That's about the cheapest monitoring you can get, but it's pretty effective as far as illustrating what's been going on. And then panel D was part of our, when we just did our monitoring. And what you'll notice about this particular site and the next one is that when the project was constructed, some of the limbs were cut back so that the machine could put the sand in and build the rocks. But what happens, this stuff, of course, comes back. And in the course of returning, it shades out the marshes. So the maintenance of these systems has really not occurred because once they're put in, people sort of forget about them. But our monitoring has sort of brought some of this to the fore, and hopefully some of the landowners will take heed and work on that. So this is part of the project. This project was actually about 2,000 feet long, and so after 5 years, the marsh there were a few Phragmites plants. Phragmites australis is an invasive species. Many of you may know about it in the bay. It's very aggressive. It's been around for years. And then during our monitoring, you can see on panel B, the Phragmites has come in quite robustly. So what used to be a nice, robust intertidal and high marsh system has been taken over by Phrag. From a shore protection perspective, it might not be bad, but from the habitat that you would put in there to establish, it kind of takes that over. Now, this particular section of it didn't have a high marsh because there was a bulkhead behind it. This is just the low marsh. In reality, it's done very well, and no Phrag has come in there. It doesn't like salt water so much. And so this intertidal marsh is actually worked after 16 years, is still in very, very good shape. And so you get other species, Juncus marianus come in, there's crabs all over. The habitat between the marsh and the rocks is really great. Once again, we set up a lot of surveys when we surveyed it a few years ago. We were unable to accommodate all these, mostly because the Phrag, very hard to survey when the Phrag is over your head. And so really over the years, from the last time we surveyed it to now, it's been a very stable system behind this, behind the sill and up against the high bank there. Once again, it cannot really migrate up the bank very well. Okay, so let's talk about sea level rise. Here we are again, we have a high bank. And so what do? When we design these systems, it's typically for an event, a storm event, 10, 25, 50-year event, return interval. But then now we have the sea level itself coming up 1 foot and 2 feet with all those storm frequencies on top of that. So there are ways to do this, and this is one way to look at it, is to actually add sand and add rock. And so that begs the question, do we add sand and rock now, or do we adapt in the future for the next 30 years? These are management issues and questions that we're all sort of grappling with, and it fits in a lot with the scenario of coastal resilience and how we're going to address these systems in a cost-effective manner. So there's that for thought. Okay, now this is the last site. It's on the Patuxent River. Actually, it's about a mile of shoreline with all kinds of different breakwaters and sills, and so we had monitored. We were part of the design team when it was put in with Calvert County, Maryland. And this was back when we monitored in 2008. And even then, frag was coming in there, and you can see the sort of the eclectic structures that you see along there. You have wing breakwaters, you have sills, you have gaps. It's quite an array of different types of structures, all for shore protection. Okay, this is our recent survey, and this is the big sill in the middle, sill number 4, and it actually has a low section in the middle of it we call a weir. And you can see how the marsh was planted actually right up behind it, and it has receded in response to tidal action. As I say, mid-tide moved it back a little bit. And then if you look at the ends of it, on B, you have the marsh right up behind it. The sill is high enough to maintain the sand fill and the marsh behind it. And once again, C shows us, without maintenance, how trees come over, they shade it out, and it's ripe for frag to invade the system. Once again, the frag is on these last 2 sites has really sort of become the main event, and there's been little or no effort to try to maintain it or kill it. I mean, one can argue that, from a shore protection perspective, everything's fine. And it's gotten, just as 2008, 10 years later, the frag is still very robust. And this is our surveys, 2008, 2018. You can see that really not too much change has occurred there. We have a few cross sections in here. We've actually had some accretion on one section, and actually that one in the middle was near the end of that sill, so it had a kind of eroded back and adjusted. And once again, cross sections do modify and evolve, but the back shore, the shore protection component of this is still very much in place. So sea level rise. The issue once again here is that we have a high bank. We have a system that we've put in there, and so what would be at this stage of the game, after this structure's been in 16 years, what do we do now? Is it still protecting the shoreline, and what can we expect in the future? Well, it might be just as simple as adding rock to it. Now that sounds simple, but you got to get to these sites. This particular site was constructed from barge, so that might be a way to get back to it, as well as St. Mary's City was in large part constructed by barge from the water. So that makes adapting these types of sites a little easier when you want to add rock. This is my last slide. Well, not my last slide, but my next to the last slide. I want to show, when we talk about the frag, the implication of salinity. Captain Sinclair and Camp Occohannock are sitting in there in the yellow in the 15 to 20 parts per thousand salinity range. Ocean salinity, for reference, is about 35 parts per thousand. So we're up in the bay, and that varies obviously from spring, summer, fall, and winter. But as you get up and higher into the lower salinities, up into the bay, Jeff Pat and St. Mary's, you can see those lower salinities, I believe, and I've talked to other folks, that they allow some of the Phragmites to move in a little more aggressively than they would down in the lower bay. So I guess I'm asking for questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Liz, do we have any questions or comments for Scott?
Yes, we do.
Uh-oh.
So the first question is from James himself. Is the sill needed after the grass has been established? And then a follow-up question, how cost effective are sills versus other coastal protection methods?
Let's do the first one again.
Is the sill needed after the grass has been established?
Fill?
Sill.
Sand?
The sand.
I mean sand?
Oh, you meant fill?
No, the rock base, the rock still.
The rock is designed to be robust and it's very much intact. The sand does migrate and can adjust after you put it in. And oftentimes that's why you have to let it sit for a week or 3 before you plant the grasses, to let it, especially the intertidal species, to let the tide hydraulically compact that material before you plant it. And unless there's a real blowout, typically you don't need any more sand, but you surely might need more plants. What was that second question?
How cost effective are the sills versus other coastal protection methods?
Well, you try to design it for a level of protection. Every county has a FEMA report with the 10, 1500 year return on water levels in it. You can use that as a design criteria. But it's the thing about, you're probably comparing with a rock revetment, which is probably the more popular shore protection method. And you can, depending on the site, of course, the more open fetch, more wind wave energy, the bigger the system, the higher it needs to be, as well as the revetment. So the rock essentially becomes about, from a cost perspective, about a wash. When you add the sand to it, that can add a little more to it. So these structures can be a little more expensive depending on access and those types of things, but very competitive nonetheless. Plus you get some really nice reef habitat and some really nice marsh, as well as shore protection.
Great. Another question about the plants that you're using. So it's looking like there's only one species used for the plants. So is there a specific plant species that you use? Do you find some work better than others? Would a diversity of species of plants work better to kind of keep that resiliency?
Well, in the lower bay, there's 2 species, Spartina alterniflora and Spartina patens. And the alterniflora grows between high water and mid tide, and Spartina patens will grow up on a dune. So those are the 2 species that have really been traditionally used for this system for 35 and 40 years. And there's quite a database on how well they've done, and they've done very well. Now, when you move up into fresher water, there's a lot more different types of species you can use in both the intertidal and the supertidal system. But in terms of root growth and peat development, these 2 are superior. Freshwater species don't do as well when it comes to that. So the brackish and saltwater projects typically use these 2 species. Now other things will come in there, and like I say, you kind of salt bushes will come in there, and you kind of have to watch it because it'll shade out the grasses that you want to keep in there and keep that deep root system intact, especially for storm events.
Great. And as you mentioned, there's other species that might come in there, like Phragmites, that you mentioned a few times throughout.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can't, yeah, there's that.
Are there any good ways to get rid of Phragmites, or, do you have any management strategies for it?
Well, the best way to do it is to kill it before it gets there. So you'll see it come in, and you need to, there's different types of poisons, Roundup, Rodeo, if you have to apply it properly, of course, that you can wick the plants and try to keep them from getting into your system. Once it gets established, as much as that has been, it's very difficult to kill it with herbicides and stuff. And then one way to do it is to really dig it up and put more sand in to start all over again. And of course, that becomes a real issue and a real problem. So maintaining it with time is the best way to do it.
Gotcha. All right, you mentioned putting down filter sheet prior to placing the rocks. What is the function of that?
Filter cloth is what it's called. It's a there's different kinds. They have different strengths depending on how much rock and that type of thing. But you put that under the structure so that any kind of settlement, and when you put the systems in, typically you will have some initial settlement of the structures depending on the bottom, which is one thing you need to check before you put it in. What kind of substrate do you have? But the filter cloth allows the structure to sort of settle and equilibrate more as a uniform mass rather than differentially. Really, filter cloth came into play 40 or 50 years ago and sort of took the place of a gravel or rock subgrade to put larger rock on. So that's its function.
Gotcha. And is the rock a uniform size, or is a smaller diameter rock used in the core?
Well, there's a smaller diameter rock used inside and under the rock called the core. It is, and then the armor stone is put on top. Typically, the armor stone is sized for the wave climate that is being exposed there. So for Captain Sinclair, for instance, that was class 2 riprap, Virginia riprap, 150 to 500 pounds, whereas when you got to Camp Occohannock, it was class 3, 500 to 1,500 pounds. So that's that information is available through different engineering avenues and mechanisms. And plus, they've been put in so long, it's kind of folks know what works and which site setting.
Great. And how do you decide on the height of the rock structure?
That's a good one. Well, typically you are looking at your wind wave climate. You want to attenuate the waves that are coming in. So typically, the higher wind wave energy, the higher the structure would be. And at Camp Occohannock, I really wish we'd have raised that one in front of the bank up to 3.5 feet because of I think that it allowed some of that low marsh to settle a little bit. Well, some people don't like to hear this, but there's a factor called money, and money has a lot to do with how well these systems are going to work. And you try to get the best bang for your buck for the funding available. And you don't want to put in why can't you put it at mean high water? Mean high water, any kind of storm's gonna come here and shear that sand and shear your plants off. So it needs to be, typically the sill's gonna be a 1/2 foot to 1.5 feet above mean high water in these types of settings.
Great. And then one last question. You mentioned monitoring of these projects. So what kind of monitoring is actually done for these living shoreline projects? Is there any actual water quality data being collected, above or below or at the site to see if there's any water quality impacts, or is it just monitoring the plants and the effectiveness of the shoreline?
I would say that the marsh, doing the above and below ground biomass, the nutrients reduction within that is probably some of the main things that are done from a biological perspective. As far as water quality per se, I'd say there's some monitoring efforts around that look at that in a local capacity. But as far as when you're looking at these sites, they're sitting in pretty open water. I mean, they're tidally influenced. So there's other than some nutrient-laden groundwater that may be coming in, I think the water quality is probably not too much of an issue, but I would defer to the water quality experts in the field to that.
Great. That wraps up the question, so I'll turn it back to you, James.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much, Scott.
Yep.
Our last speaker today is Katie Register. She'll be talking about combating plastic pollution. Katie Register is the Executive Director for Clean Virginia Waterways, which is dedicated to improving our rivers and oceans through citizen stewardship. Katie works exclusively on preventing water pollution. She focuses mainly on land-based sources of plastic pollution, including the impacts of litter from cigarettes, food packaging, and helium balloons. Katie has a master's degree from Miami University in biology and a master's degree from George Mason University in environmental science and public policy. She is a co-founder of the Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network. Katie is also a Virginia Water Monitoring Council Steering Committee member. Welcome,
Great,
Katie.
thank you. Thank you, James, and thank you all. It's really exciting to be here today to talk about combating plastic pollution in Virginia. All right, just have to get my, there we go. So I wanted to start by just sharing some background information about what are we talking about with plastic pollution. It's much more than just litter. There's many sources of the plastic and waste in our waterways, in the ocean, and 60 to 80% comes from land-based sources. It comes from people who litter from their vehicles, from overstuffed trash cans, as you see here. It comes from illegal dumping of tires, mattresses, and construction waste. It even can come from homeless encampments. And also balloons, people who purchase balloons, take them outside, let them go, 100% of those return to the earth or a water body. So again, most of this debris that we're talking about comes from land-based sources. Another way that plastic is getting into the environment is the aftermath of buildings that are remodeled using polystyrene panels that are cut to size, glued to buildings to create a new facade. The picture on the right was taken in Richmond in May. It looks like snow, but in fact, those are just thousands of tiny pellets of polystyrene. And there is a definite stormwater connection. The litter and debris on parking lots and on roads and outside of businesses enter the aquatic world through stormwater. And actually, Clean Virginia Waterways has sponsored now 3 workshops for stormwater managers, and the last 2 were co-sponsored by the Virginia Water Monitoring Council, working with stormwater managers to better understand how to monitor and how to prevent this type of debris. There are also water-based sources of plastic and debris in our waterways, including fishing gear that becomes abandoned or derelict, as well as derelict vessels. And disasters such as tsunamis, hurricanes, flooding also contribute a lot of debris into our waterways. But why are we focusing on plastic? Well, we focus on plastic pollution. Of course, there's litter that's made out of paper or glass, but most of it is plastic, and we're concerned about it because it lasts so long in the environment. As we see, a disposable diaper, about 450 years, fishing line, 600 years. And most of the plastic we use, as we'll see in a moment, is used for a very temporary use, single use often. So basically, we're using a permanent material for very temporary uses. Here's a chart that shows a projection of plastic waste over the next few decades. And you see that we are facing an increase in the amount of plastic produced and discarded. And I want to point out that this chart shows plastic waste. Actual production of plastic is higher. The difference is plastic items that are made to last, like a computer case and that's made out of plastic that lasts 5 or 6 years before it's time to reach the end of its life. So most of the plastic we're producing is for one-time use, single-use disposables. Fracked gas in the United States is also making the production of new plastic less expensive than recycled plastics. And I want to point out that we cannot recycle our way out of this problem. Yes, we should recycle. That's definitely part of the mix, but recycling alone will not handle this amount of waste. So a quick poll, what do you think is the biggest impact of plastic pollution? And we'll just vote real quickly.
All right, we have some answers coming in, so I'll leave this up
Okay.
for another few moments. We have 43% votes, so get those answers in.
Okay, let's show the results.
All righty.
Okay, interesting. I was very interested to see how people would vote on this. Microplastics and then the human food chain shows up as the #1 concern, and then impact on animals and biotransfer. So great. And let's take a look. Okay, if you could take that down. All right, having trouble here. There we go. Yeah, so that was very interesting to see what you all thought about the biggest impacts. Certainly there are physical impacts on animals as well as biotransfer of toxins that adhere to plastic debris or are part of the plastic resins themselves. Ingestion is an enormous issue, probably the one that gets the most publicity in the media, animals that mistake our debris for food. And then entanglement, animals that become entangled in our debris, very, very big issues. And certainly plastic food in the, or plastic in our food chain, our food web, is of growing concern, lots of research being done on this. And in fact, some studies have found, as you see here, plastic has been found in the majority of lobsters, shrimp, other bivalves, and even salt and beer. And whenever one of these new studies come out, there's usually a lot of awareness in media, especially about the beer. There's certainly impacts too on human or on habitat as well as economics. It costs a lot of money to clean a beach. It costs a lot of money to do street sweeping and removal of other debris, not to mention loss of tourism dollars. There's studies that show that littered beaches attract fewer consumer dollars, tourist dollars, than clean beaches. So many impacts to this debris. Another quick poll. What do you think is the #1 type of plastic litter? And you can think about it in Virginia or the United States or the world.
All right, we've got 25% voted, so hold this open for a couple more seconds to get those votes in.
Okay, can we show the results? All right, so 38 of you, or 38% believe that cigarette butts are the #1 type of plastic litter, followed by plastic bottles, food wrappers. So let's take a look. What I'm going to show here is, well, 3 charts actually. The first on the left show the top 10 littered items on the planet Earth. This is based on data collected during the International Coastal Cleanup last year in 2019. In the middle are the top 10 littered items found by volunteers in the United States. And on the right, we've got the list for Virginia. And you'll notice that in Virginia and the United States, cigarette butts were the #1 most frequently found type of debris, and they are plastic. They are in the plastic category, because those little white fibers that look like cotton are actually cellulose acetate and do not readily biodegrade. On the side of the earth, you see food wrappers are the #1 thing that were found last year by volunteers. And this was the first time in 34 years of collecting data that cigarette butts were not the #1 thing worldwide. This is the first time food wrappers took the first place slot. But if you look at all of these lists, you see a lot of commonalities. It's pretty much all made up of litter and debris and trash from what we eat and what we drink. You see bottles, food wrappers, cans, bottle caps, straws. If we stopped mismanaging the waste from what we eat and what we drink and what we smoke, we would have a dramatically different top 10 list. By the way, all the data shared here is available to anyone in the world by going to the Ocean Conservancy's online database. You might have also seen in the last month some media coverage of the issue of how plastic food packaging now outpaces cigarette butts, at least in the world. That's another great thing about cleanups and other citizen science attempts to gather data, is it definitely raises awareness about this issue. Now, what's going on in Virginia? Virginia has a marine debris reduction plan in place. We were only the second state in the United States to have a plan in place, and we were the first on the East Coast. So we're very proud of Virginia's leadership on this issue. This plan was put together 6 years ago through a large collaborative project. It's now being updated to set priorities for 2021 through 2025. And the marine debris issue was rated as a high priority by the Virginia Coastal Policy Team, which is the team that advises the priorities for the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. So rating this as a high issue should lead to more funding and more funding opportunities to combat this source of pollution. Also, there's a brand new Virginia Plastic Pollution Prevention Network that just started. It's only a few months old. Our goal, actually, we looked at the Virginia Water Monitoring Council's structure as we put together this new network, because we wanted it to share many of the same functions of increasing collaboration and increasing sharing. We have monthly Zoom meetings during which we give updates, and every month we have a different 10-minute presentation. And we also have a monthly digest of announcements, so members can share new research or a new paper or a job opening, new events. If you are interested in learning more about this Plastic Pollution Prevention Network, there is the email address. We do not yet have a website, but we're working on it. But you can contact us and let us know your interest in becoming a member, and it is free for organizations and free for individuals who work for organizations that are working on this issue. I also wanted to let you know that Virginia is also working very closely with other mid-Atlantic states to combat marine debris on a regional level, because so much of our debris that we're finding in Virginia coastal waters could easily come from neighboring states. It's a project that we need to work on together. So we're working with New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and DC to look for regional solutions. Also in Virginia, this last General Assembly in Richmond was very exciting. Lots of action on plastic pollution related issues. The first one there is the doubling of the Virginia litter tax. The Virginia litter tax has been in place since the mid-1970s, and it was never increased over 40 plus years. So last year, or earlier this year, it doubled. So a mom and pop bait shop that sells beer and soda, Walmart that sells beer and sodas, They used to pay $10 a year, and now they pay $20 a year to this litter tax. The litter tax money then goes to counties and municipalities and cities to increase recycling and prevent littering. The second thing there, it's now legal for local governments to pass fees on single-use bags. It used to be if Fairfax or Falls Church or Virginia Beach was interested in putting a fee on a bag, they could not. They did not have permission from Richmond, because as was mentioned by an earlier speaker, Virginia is a Dillon rule state, and Dillon rule states mean that permission has to be given to local governments to take some actions. So right now, I know of at least 3 municipalities that are seriously taking action and looking at instigating a fee of a nickel on single-use bags. Also this year, a fine was raised for those companies and outlets that do not pay the litter tax. Even though it's such a tiny tax, there were some that were not paying it, so there's now a larger fine. Also, the second to last item, the General Assembly instructed DEQ to create a plastic waste prevention advisory council. This council will be looking at recommendations to further decrease the amount of plastic waste that's ending up in the environment, with a specific look at expanded polystyrene. And then the last item, and I should point out that that advisory council has not yet been named, but we hope that that will be happening very soon. And then another bill that was passed this last General Assembly looks at expanded polystyrene. This is, most people call it styrofoam, which is actually a name that belongs to the Dow Chemical Company. But the polystyrene that we see in clamshell takeout containers and drinks, hot drinks. So this bill was passed last year, but it has to pass one more year. It has to pass next year before it is going to be in effect. And it basically will decrease slowly the use of polystyrene until it's no longer allowed in packaging in Virginia. If you want to learn more about these bills and any bills that will be coming up in the next General Assembly, the best place to look is Litter Free Virginia. Their website is litterfreeva.org, and they keep you up to date on where the bills are as they work through the legislature. There's also a lot of research going on about plastic pollution, marine debris, litter prevention. This particular study went on for 4 years and 4 months on 4 different coastal beaches in Virginia. Volunteers and trained employees went out every month for 4 years and 4 months, every 28 days, plus or minus 2 days. And they followed a protocol that was written by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And the result of that 4-month study showed that 83% of the debris on these 4 coastal beaches in Virginia was in fact made out of plastic. So that is another reason that we're so concerned about this. Here is a chart that shows the items that were found during this cleanup. You see number 1 were bottle caps, number 2 balloons, both the latex balloons and the plastic balloons that are covered with metallic paint, which are often called mylar or foil balloons. A lot of people are surprised to see balloons in the number 2 spot so high, but balloons are actually found to accumulate in coastal environments. They travel through the air, end up in the ocean, and then wind and currents take them onto the beaches. There was another monitoring program that went on, started by Christina Trapani and Kathy O'Hara, later funded through the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program. And this study found over 11,000 balloon littered items on the beaches that you see there in the lower left. These are, for the most part, islands where nobody lives, barrier islands, and yet balloons were the #1 most frequently found type of debris, up to 272 items, balloon-related litter items per mile. So it is quite an issue, at least in the coastal environments of Virginia. Another study underway, actually this project's been going on for a while through the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. They do research on ghost fishing gear. By ghost, we mean it's still in the environment, still catching animals, but it's no longer retrieved or retrievable by crabbers or fishers. Their estimate is that derelict crab pots in coastal Virginia and the Chesapeake waters kill about 900,000 animals each year. And these are not just crabs, but also diamondback terrapins, birds, fish, any animal that gets in that trap and then can't get out. They estimate that the economic loss to the crab fishery is about $300,000. And their website has a number of their more current research. It's amazing work that they've done. There's another thing going on in Virginia. In fact, autumn is a very big month or a very big season for getting people out to do cleanups. Unfortunately, we still have to do cleanups. It's remedial, but important. The short-term benefit of cleanups is that tons of debris, mostly plastic, is removed from the environment by volunteers. As you see below, last year's International Coastal Cleanup worldwide, 20 million pounds were removed worldwide. Here in Virginia, our volunteers removed 137,000 pounds. And this is just one cleanup. There's many, many different cleanups that go on in Virginia. Some are local, some are regional. There's Adopt a Highway. So this is just data from one set of cleanups. The long-term benefit of cleanups come when volunteers collect data. Here are some volunteers collecting data about what they're finding, how many items. The data then are all fed into an international database so we can look for trends. In Virginia, the International Coastal Cleanup has been organized by my organization, Clean Virginia Waterways, since 1995. And in that time, we've had 116,000 volunteers pick up almost 5 million pounds of litter. Some of the trends the data show us, 20, 25, 30 years ago, we found a lot more glass bottles, metal cans, and paper bags. These items all over the last decade or so have been increasingly replaced with plastic alternatives. So we definitely see a trend towards more plastic. There's many other trends that we've seen, but those are some of the big ones. The data also help us look at local issues and local solutions. Here's pictures taken of beach toys that are left on the beach at the end of the day, sometimes by people who think, oh, I'll leave this for the kids who come tomorrow so they can play with it. But overnight, with a high tide, many of these end up being washed into the ocean. So we actually have had planned in Virginia Beach to put up take a toy, leave a toy boxes this year, but because of COVID, that project's been delayed. But again, local data about hotspots and problems with debris can help come up with local solutions. Another citizen science project that people can get engaged with is the Crab Trap app, which was put together by the Center for Coastal Resource Management at VWMC, where citizens can download an app and then report any sightings of derelict crab pots. Their findings will be put on a map for future removal efforts. Another interesting thing that's happening in Virginia, in Fairfax, Operation Stream Shield works with homeless shelter clients who are paid $10 an hour to remove litter from the streams of Fairfax. And this is a cooperative program of several Fairfax County agencies and shelters, including stormwater management and the MS4 program. So they see the benefits of, I mean, this is just a win-win-win program all around. Another thing that's going on in Fairfax, and perhaps in the future, more areas around Virginia, is collecting and removing in-stream presence of plastic pollution. So this is called a band-along litter trap. It is anchored into a stream. There's no electricity, no power needed. It floats in the stream, and any debris floating coming downstream gets captured into this trap, and then it is removed before the next rain event. So this is called, again, a band-along device, and was installed just in May in Fairfax. There's several of these in Washington, D.C. and Maryland as well. There's also many behavior change campaigns underway to encourage people to use reusable water bottles instead of single use, and also ways to have celebrations and memorials that are litter-free. And that brings me to this slide. We have found that through a 5-year research project looking at who releases balloons and why they release balloons, we discovered that memorial services are a leading reason people release balloons, which is why we're encouraging people to look at preventballoonlitter.org. This was started by Virginians, but it is an international website. We've got partners from Africa, Asia, South America, who are endorsing this message of find better ways to celebrate or to honor your loved ones, ways that do not produce this deadly form of debris. There's also many campaigns looking to reduce the number of single-use straws, because straws have been on our top 10 list for decades. And it's a great example of environmental change. 10 years ago, very few people thought to say, no, I don't want a single-use straw. But now more and more restaurants and bars are only giving out straws on request. And when they do, they give them high-quality paper straws. So like I say, many campaigns underway in Virginia. And then one last poll question. Who do you think should lead the efforts to decrease plastic pollution?
All right, we've got those votes coming in.
All right. All right, let's take a look at the results. Okay, interesting. So the plastic manufacturers and individuals have the top 2 spots. And after that, we've got governments and fast food companies. Great. I don't think there's a right answer here. In fact, I wonder if I had put all of the above, how many of you might have chosen that answer. But I agree with all of you that all of these need to be part of the solution. Certainly producers could introduce systemic change. The people who are making items, packaging items, can make decisions that are pre-consumer. Then there's mid-market, hotels, businesses, local governments. Your purchasing decisions matter. And those are the mid-market. And then the end users, certainly individual actions can be taken every day to reduce the amount of litter that we're producing, the amount of plastic pollution that we're contributing to. So at that point, I want to thank you all for listening about trash. We love to talk about it here, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
All right, thank you, Katie. I think we have time for a couple of questions.
All righty.
Great. The first question is on that chart of the top littered items with the Earth, the US, and Virginia. Was
Yes.
that calculated by individual counts of each thing or by weight?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is by individual count of items. So there were like more than 4.5 million food wrappers found. Right, so it's by item, not by volume. Great question.
Great. What are we doing, or what can be done when major manufacturing companies continue to mass produce all plastic items mentioned here today?
Yeah, well, certainly there is evidence that some companies will change their decisions based on input from customers. I'm thinking here a few years ago, McDonald's stopped using polystyrene food containers for their Big Macs. They switched to a paper alternative, and that was because of pressure from consumers. And I think that's what it's going to have to take, because right now, at least, some plastic packaging costs less than biodegradable. That might change as more biodegradable plastics are created, economies of scale. So I think pressure from consumers is really necessary, especially with the fast food industry.
Great. Any ideas what could be done since China no longer accepts our recycling? How easy would it be for a US company to set up a recycling center to transfer recycled plastics into new products?
Yeah, actually, when China first declared that they would stop taking our plastic waste, I heard that there was going to be a large infusion of investments in increasing recycling ability and capacity in the United States. Quite honestly, I have not seen that materialize. I think partly because of fracked gas, making virgin plastics just so much more affordable than recycled. I know that there's still a lot of exporting of plastic waste to other countries, not China, but other countries. There's also been more of a look at incineration of plastics, which has its own environmental issues. So, I guess that's why I was saying that we're not going to get out of this by recycling. I do wish we had a larger capacity for recycling in this country, but we don't. So I think that when we think in terms of reduce, reuse, and recycle, we really have to focus on those first two. Reduce the amount that we're using, and then get things that we reuse. But yeah, we're not in a great spot right now in the United States with our capacity to do large scale recycling.
Okay.
One
last question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What are your thoughts on micro and nano plastic contamination?
Right, lots of research going on. In fact, there's a Chesapeake Bay work group that's looking specifically at microplastics in the Chesapeake Bay. Certainly a growing issue. There's two major sources of microplastics. One is when macroplastics, like a bottle, something large, breaks up into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. Cigarette fibers that there's like 10,000 cellulose acetate fibers in each filter. So that's one source of microplastics, big stuff breaking up into small stuff. And then the other is small pieces of plastic that were manufactured specifically to be small. A few years ago in the United States, there was a ban put on tiny polystyrene, a different kind of plastic pellet that was found in facial scrubs. But tiny pieces of plastic can still be found in other lotions and suntan, self-tanning lotions that we can buy. So people need to be aware about this. Like if you buy a lotion or self-tanning lotion, take a look at the back and see if you see a word that looks like plastic, polyethylene, PPE, PET. It's still legal to put microplastics in some of these items. but yeah, it's a growing issue, and more scientists are looking at it in the food chain, wondering, do animals just ingest it and pass through, or is there biotransfer of chemicals from these plastics? And then nano, even smaller pieces, there is great concern that some of them are so small they can go across cellular boundaries, that they become integrated into the animal body and not just in the gut. So I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see a huge amount of more research and answers about that. But yeah, big issue.
Great.
Okay.
There was 2 more questions that I passed your way, Katie. So if you want to take a look at those, you can put the answers in the chat box if you want to continue
Sure.
the discussion.
Actually, I don't have access to the chat box for some reason. So I'll follow up with those people later if they share their emails with me.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you
All right,
very
thank
much
you.
for your talk, Katie. Well, that wraps up our day 1 of our 2-day conference. I wanted to thank everyone, all the speakers today, for presenting. We appreciate their time and information that was provided. They have given us much to think about, covering from coastal resiliency to how we can better reduce the amount of plastic pollution getting into our waterways. We will continue the VWMC virtual conference tomorrow at the same time, 9:30 a.m., and hope you will join us then. We will have 4 speakers tomorrow. In tomorrow's session, we will hear about water scavenging in roadside springs, identifying the sources of sewer contamination so they can be addressed, winter salt watch program, and assessing aquatic life use in Virginia. To join the conference in the morning, you will simply use a link provided to you and follow the same procedures as was used today. Just a few final reminders. If you're not already a member of the Virginia Water Monitoring Council, please consider joining us. It is free. After the conference, we will send an email message to you that provides the following: instructions on how to join the council, the link to the post-conference survey. We would really encourage you to please complete that survey, as that does help us plan next year's conference, as well as a link to the recorded presentations. If you've requested an attendance certificate, it will be emailed to you in a separate mailing after the conference. Thank you, and we will continue our conference tomorrow morning at 9:30. Hope everyone has a good rest of the day. Thanks.